exactly correct. And it's really important to keep in mind for those of you that are new to the process that what you're seeing tonight is different than what you'll see in 2 weeks. And yet that'll still be a preliminary budget. So by state law, we have to approve a preliminary budget before the end of March and submit that to the county office. And then we will then revisit the budget for final approval at the end of April. So that means that things that you hear tonight, things that we see we have in place for next board meeting in 2 weeks. If there are changes, considerations, things that are on your mind, we have the time to have this conversation and make those changes. So nothing's final. But regardless, we have to approve a preliminary budget in 2 weeks, no matter what. All right. But knowing and approving that, if there's things in there that you don't feel strongly about, you don't like, whatever the case may be, there's still time to make modifications to the budget. Important to understand. So whenever you're ready,
Yeah, Colin's working on getting the screen up now.
oh, okay.
Just give her a quick second here. Thank you, Colin.
Need this to hear the folks at home? Okay. Can I take it out? Okay, so welcome everybody to the budget presentation. I first want to commend James and the cabinet, the guys, we've been working tirelessly, and also our building level administrators and supervisors. We really have been painstakingly meeting with folks, particularly as it relates to staffing with some of the things that we've been trying to do. So we've been lending input all across the board in order to. There's a delay. Okay, so we killed the sound, so the folks at home don't have to hear me twice. So in any event, the goal is really based on 3 main goals that have been developed over time in the district. So for those of you that are new, including myself, just reviewing those ones, sustain and expand upon instructional supports developed during the last 3 years to address identified learning needs. So in short, that means those supports that we have in the district that we want to keep on going or add to help some of the difficult areas that we're facing with, some of the challenges to overcome, and to also continue with some of the programs that we know have been successful is a major goal of any budget, because it's ultimately about the kids and ultimately about what we're doing to help increase learning. To sustain and expand upon the level of social and emotional learning. You guys have heard so much about this, particularly during the last 3 years, going through the pandemic, the things that our kids are still, dealing with. But it goes beyond that, because these are things that have been happening forever. All right. And now more than ever, there's a recognition and understanding how these social and emotional feelings that rest within our children impact learning. So to just pretend they don't exist and to go forward with trying to teach and learn is really spinning your wheels. So in order to support our kids, to help their learning, we need to support the whole person. And that really, in my opinion, is the difference between how a district goes from being good to being great. It's a recognition and an understanding on the part of all the people that are making the decisions that creating an environment where we're supporting and nurturing our kids, challenging them at the same time, and giving them the necessary tools that they need to succeed, all right, by putting them in a position to succeed, is really the difference between being good and being great. And Moorestown has a great reputation, and we want to continue down that path. And then lastly, expand upon district systems that ensure safety and security. We've talked about this in all of our meetings. Nothing that you're going to see tonight should be a surprise to any of you. I really admire the very open, transparent, and collaborative process that exists in this district, from our teachers, from our staff members, to our administration, and to our board. Nothing should be as a surprise to you tonight. And I don't think that it will be, but there is evidently a focus on increasing what it is that we can do in our schools to give us peace of mind, but most importantly, keep our most precious commodity as safe as humanly possible. So investing in that is a very critical piece of what it is that we're trying to do in this budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our BA, James, who has done an amazing job. James.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. And I'd like to echo Joe's comments. It's never an easy process going through the budget process, and it does truly take a team effort. So thank you to cabinet level administration, building level administration for assisting with developing the budget as it stands today. We're going to do things a little bit different than what we do typically. We're going to have kind of a tag team effort here at the front of the presentation, followed by some of the nitty-gritty financial details at the back end. So going through kind of the things that we're going to talk about, Mr. Bollendorf outlaid the goals that we relied on to develop the budget. We'll talk a little bit about the budget development process for the newer board members. It's important to understand that process and how we ultimately get to a finalized balanced budget. We'll go through some of the budget highlights. That's where some of the other cabinet members will also tag team and review some details. We'll talk about the revenues included in the budget in a little bit of a greater detail. The main revenue sources that we have in our budget is our tax levy, our state aid, our fund balance, and then what's called other revenue sources, which primarily consist of our tuition. Our appropriations, we've always talked about 80 to 85% of our budget is roughly benefits and salaries. So those two driving items, we'll see a slide on that. Capital outlay, we'll see a little bit of a greater detail. Finance and operations heard this on Monday, but capital outlay started over $11 million when we started the budget process. And that's not including some of the more pressing items that we know will come up in a future referendum, such as replacing 20-year-old HVAC equipment, boilers that are 25, 35 years old. So that doesn't even include that number, and that was over $11 million when we started. Some of the budget adjustments that we've made to date so far to get the budget deficit down. We do not have a balanced budget as of tonight. We are still working towards that. You'll see those adjustments that have led to get to where we are so far. And then ultimately, we'll talk a little bit about the tax impact. Right now, the budget does include a 2% levy increase on our general operating budget, but you'll see how that comes down to a 1.81% increase overall when we hit that slide there. So the budget development process, it starts with creating goals, which we've seen those 3 goals that we created based off of stakeholder input and ultimately district data review. From there, we also at the same exact time, we're developing what's called our budget manual. Our budget manual is a 100+ page document. That's a fun read on a nice breezy Saturday evening. But ultimately that is dictating exactly how we're going to go through our budget process. One of the things that was done different this year was at our building levels, we did a per pupil allotment on the budget for building-based budgets, with the idea there that what's the adequate dollar that it takes per student to have in supply allotments into our building-based budgets, and making sure that the money moves with the enrollment. So that is included in that budget manual as well. School administration develops their building level budgets with input from faculty and content supervisors. And our central administration goes through their budget process, which is evaluating the needs of the district and ultimately doing the departmental budgets with technology, curriculum, personnel, facilities, and one that's left out on there is transportation. Revenue and appropriations are updated based on finalized numbers. And it's important to understand that this is a very fluid process. It is not something in January that we can sit there and come to you and say, we have a finalized budget, we're balanced, we're ready to go. Those numbers update over time. Most recently, we received good news in terms of our state aid numbers, roughly a $525,000 increase on our state aid. That's great news. That came March 2nd. So this is a very fluid process. Changes happen every single day. So part of your budget process, and it's actually a QSAC compliance item, is that we have a budget calendar and that we are following that budget calendar. Our budget calendar, as F&O is aware, is a very lengthy budget calendar. This is a very condensed version of that calendar, but it speaks to where we are in that process. March 7th was the date that was set on the budget calendar as an estimated date for our board budget workshop. Here we are tonight. Moving forward, we still have to work to prioritize the district needs in order to balance our budget and get that remaining deficit closed. March 21st, as Mr. Bollendorf mentioned, is our budget introduction. After that budget introduction, I have to submit everything to the county for a very thorough review that they do. The submission to the county is probably 250 to 300 pages of documents that they use to tie everything out that's included in that budget. Once we receive approval from the county, they approve us to advertise that finalized budget. When they approve that, that is the finalized budget for adoption. At that point in time, once they approve, we cannot make any changes to that. We advertise the budget, and then April 25th, we will come back to adopt the budget. March 21st, we're approving to introduce. April 25th, we're adopting the budget. So at this point in time, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Benton to go through some of the budget highlights in curriculum and instruction.
Just before we do that, I just wanted to,
Yeah,
hopefully you're taking questions.
absolutely.
Just to make sure that everybody understands. So the 21st, March 21st is when we do the budget introduction. We approve the budget essentially, right? And it can go down, can't go up. Is that correct?
Yes, it's accurate. There can be budgetary adjustments between those two dates. Any adjustments that are made need to be communicated to the county with an explained reason as to why we're making those adjustments. It's not common that we do that. It's not a common practice.
Right. Okay. But so for all intents and purposes, the 21st is when we approve the budget, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Just so everyone understands sort of the process.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I gave up on the clicker last month. I just let you do it. Good evening, everyone. So these are a couple of budget highlights from the curriculum and instruction, which really is our teaching and learning that supports our students. In curriculum writing, last year, if you remember, you approved the adoption of our K-5 ELA program. This year, we are moving forward with our ELA curriculum for grades 6 and 8. We also have 5 other new curricula, and these are all part of our 6-year cycle within each content area that we follow to keep ourselves updated with the new standards and keep in QSAT compliance. Additionally, we have continued revisions and standards update. This was really a 2-year process. We divided those revisions and updates over last year and this year. Our QSAC review will begin in October of 2023. So this will get us up to speed on all of our curricula across all of our grade levels. There is a major shift from College Board in our AP courses and how they are delivering instruction through digital platforms. So we're giving our AP teachers over the summer, those that are experiencing those changes in their courses, time to update their digital platforms and make sure that they are in compliance with College Board, because they're also changing the assessment that goes along with that. And we want our students to be best prepared that they're using those resources throughout the year. And then we will also begin and a multilingual learner, which that we're making a transition from calling it English as a second language, and the state is encouraging the use of multilingual learner. And so we're looking to do a curriculum rewrite with Francisco Santiago, our new supervisor for ESL. Under curricular resources, we continue each year to update our textbooks and digital learning access that are going to support 23 different courses and curricular programs that aligns with the curricular writing that we are doing, as well as looking at those digital instructional and assessment platforms that we use throughout the district. Under professional development, we're looking at 3 different district focal points that we'll want to support with budget funds: multi-tiered systems of support, multilingual learners, as well as continuing our diversity, inclusion, and cultural responsiveness training for teachers. Additionally, to support our full PD days and our swap days, we have teacher presenters and outside presenters, AP Summer Institutes to keep our teachers. We'll have several new teachers moving in to do AP teaching in the next year, new teacher orientation. And then finally, we started last year for our major adoptions to make sure that we are implementing when we have large adoptions that cover multiple buildings and multiple grade levels, embedded support teams. We have successfully done that this year, I believe, with our K-5 ELA adoption. And we'll be looking to move into doing that for K-8 for the math pilot year, which involves 34 teachers. And then the following year, we would be doing the full adoption across all 9 grade levels. Thanks. Thank you. So this is just a little look into the major adoption that we have for next year into literature. Oh, sorry. Okay. So also with our 2 goals for supporting through educational support and student learning, as well as social emotional learning. Some of the things that we you'll see in the budget, as I said, we're continued PD and curricular resource focus that focuses on small group and guided instruction that really fits within that multi-tier systems of supports when we're looking at our tier 1 supports, which are the things that happen in the classroom. We are looking at smaller class size at grade 1 to provide more intensive support for the development of foundational skills. Dyslexia therapist is one of the new staffing positions that we looked at, as well as intervention support staff that we would like to maintain from the grant that we've had over the last 2 years. Under support for student wellness, we are looking to implement a new social SEL program adoption at WAMS. This is the same program, Character Strong, that we currently use at UES. This, as we've worked with our different stakeholders to have the continuity of the same SEL program over grades 4 through 8 is really going to help us to provide the SEL competencies that we're trying to build in skills, which really speaks to our goal 2. And then, as I said, the professional development focus with the goal that we are looking to foster diversity, inclusion, and sense of belonging, both in our classrooms and in our school communities. The district mental health professional is another position we'd like to maintain from the grant. And Care Solace is something that we brought in at the end of last year and then during this year, which is an online platform for counseling service referrals, which really helps us for students who are in that tier 3 and need intensive support beyond what the school support staff can provide. This is a way to help make sure that students are receiving those services. And then into lit grade 6 to 8. This is a 6-year package. As I said, our 6-year adoption. It will support literacy learning for 970 students across 3 grade levels, which is also 6th grade is part of UES, 7th and 8th grade at the WAMS. Similar to Into Reading, it is a module-based building of content and skill knowledge across both whole and small group instruction, as well as students engaging in research and inquiry-based learning. And again, this is addressing over the last couple of months, I have presented some of our assessment data. And one of the things that we have identified in our literacy learning is really getting students to look at that informational text and being able to have a balance between literature and then informational grade level text and the different skill sets that they are required to do for those standards. And again, the other things that go along with that are the professional development, which is the embedded support, as well as bringing the publisher in for on-site training. And then the summer curriculum writing is also within that. Just for Intulit, that is 40 hours per course over 5 courses, including our honors courses. Any questions?
I have some questions. So on the Care Solace program, do you have any sense as to how much that's utilized?
How much it's utilized?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. So we did basically like a utilization report. I don't have it in front of me, but I do have a report that I can share with the board.
Sure.
However, what we did found is that specifically at the secondary level, our WAMs and the high school, our counselors are making consistent referrals. Do not quote me, but I will say over 50 students have been serviced this year through Care Solis.
Okay. And for the dyslexia position.
Yes.
Which is new, which I think is great, but is sort of what's the rationale as to adding that position?
And Dave can chime in with this one.
Okay.
This was a strong recommendation that came out of our K through 6. As you know, we had our basic skills teachers. We also have reading specialists, as well as our CST staff. And what we have found is that when students have a dyslexic profile, servicing them in basic skills doesn't necessarily meet their need, right? It's not an appropriate placement. However, right now, we don't have a person or a team that would work with students that are meeting that profile. Additionally, there have been new code that has come into place in terms of being compliant with the need to provide first a universal screener for all students for dyslexia. And then those students that are identified require follow-up assessment and then the provision of a plan to specifically address their learning needs.
Okay.
So this dyslexia therapist would also work to do some of that assessment as well as training, in addition to working specifically with students. So it would serve a couple of functions, and Dave can jump in as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. Mark, the only thing I can add in is that this person would also, and you mentioned at the end there, provide training to our other staff members. We have a uniquely certified teacher who's able to provide training in Wilson reading and a very specific training for students who are dyslexic. It is an area that we have improved upon over time, but certainly this will bolster our ability to address the needs of all of those students.
Okay, great. And then, so for the ELA package, which was, I guess it's for grades 6 through 8,
Yes.
right? Do you have a sense as to when we would implement ELA package for the other grades and sort of the
Well,
timings?
This year we did K to 5.
Okay,
So K to 5 is done. We'll be in year 2. This next year, we're doing grades 6 to 8. And then in the following year, the plan is to do grades 9 to 12. That's be a little bit more complicated. That may happen over 2 years because now you're talking about each grade component and each level within that. So
Okay.
that may be a 2-year span of time over which we do that.
okay. And then since this is the budget workshop, do you have a sense as to sort of the price tag for the CNI budget and what that percentage increase or decrease might be from last year?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but I
That's
can
fine.
work
That's
on
fine.
that
We can
question
talk.
for you.
Yeah.
We can get that.
Yeah.
Actually,
Other question?
well, this is not one you're going to be able to answer right now.
Okay.
I'm just kind of giving you, and actually, I'm glad you're standing next to Jeff because it kind of goes to both of you. We've made significant investments in technology over the years, and I know, Jeff, you probably have a component coming up here. I saw there's some increases in the oh, there it is right there. I'd like to get a better understanding of the integration between like how we're choosing equipment that supports what we're doing with our curriculum development, and then potentially how we can start to address costs with that. And just to put it pretty succinctly, seeing our kids carrying laptops and ever expanding backpacks as they get older is a little frustrating. To me as a parent, and also I think to the kids as their backs feel that. So I'd just like to kind of get a sense of that. And again, as much of that as you can touch on now, I'm in the curriculum committee, obviously, so I can hear about it there too, but just kind of that messaging I'd be curious about.
And I believe I shared this in finance and operations as well yesterday. One of the things that we have seen really over, I would say like the 5 to 7 years, right, is that there has been a transition in what curricular resources are offered in a digital format. And I think if you look back maybe 7, almost 10 years ago, what the curricular resources, they pretty much took the textbook and they put it in a PDF form and you could like scroll through it, but it wasn't interactive. It didn't include any type of instructional tools or learning tools for students and teachers. And then over the last, let's say 5 to 7 years, and certainly I think during the pandemic, what you saw was like a very speedy shift to now, yes, I can, read a textbook, on my laptop, but there's also lots of interactive tools. There's adaptive tools. So a lot, for instance, our IXL is one product that we use and it is adaptive. So the 4 of you could all be using it in the same grade level, starting at the same point, but depending on what you are learning and how fast you're learning it, it adapts and it's giving you the things that, we say is the stretch, right? It's right in front of you learning. So that's one big trend that we see. And so oftentimes now when we're going to select a curricular resource, we're really looking at both what are the digital resources that are available, but there is also still a lot of value, right, in the kind of hard copy resources that are in the thing. And I don't know about anybody else, but there's something about opening up a book, right, and doing your annotation and highlighting. And while those tools may be available, right, in a digital format, when we're in the classroom and teachers are working with groups of students, I think it's important that they have that. And so we have made some transitions because we do want to make it be efficient. So for instance, one thing that we can look at is maybe we're not purchasing a hard copy textbook for every kid, but there's a classroom set available. So in the classroom, they're using that. However, we have, students that may have accommodations that still need that textbook. On the flip side of that, we can't go all hard copy because if the pandemic taught us anything, right, is that we do have to be able to flip the switch, so to speak. So right now, what districts are doing everywhere is there's these bundles, right? And you're buying the packages and you're trying to figure out, what that is. One of the things that we have seen, and I shared this in F&O, is that coming out of the pandemic, publishers have totally figured this out, that no district is not going with the digital format. And so the prices have really increased in terms of that. And the difference is that I could buy a textbook at year 1, and year 6, when it was time to readopt, if things got delayed, I still had that hard copy textbook. Now they can just turn your license off, right? And so you have to make choices about, renewing 1 year or how long that renewal is going to be. So we are looking for efficiencies in how we do our packaging. The other way that we're looking efficiencies, and Jeff and I have worked, is we have a plethora of different apps and software and online assessment tools that we are using, for instance, as well as other curricular resources that are online. And we are, over the course of this year and into next year, doing utilization reports on those, as well as I've asked my CNI team across their different content areas to look at how do each of the resources align to the curriculum. Is it required, right? So in other words, it's a part of how we're delivering the curriculum. Is it supplemental, or is it kind of a nice to have, right? And so we'll be able to make some priority decisions around that as we move forward in the budget. And we've already started to do that. So some of the cuts that you will see is part of that process that we've started to do, where we're saying, if we're not utilizing this fully, then can we look to say, instead of buying 6 building licenses, if I only have 2 buildings that are using it to justify an institutional license, and maybe I can buy individual licenses, so teachers who are using it, one-off here and there, still have access to it for their particular classroom, but we're not wasting money, if you will, buying 6 institutional licenses.
And also, Karen and I work quite closely together on making sure the technology is supporting the curriculum, the educational tools. We want the education to drive the technology, not the technology to drive the education. Certainly. So we talk a lot. We talk with supervisors, what kind of software they're using to make sure we're aligned. In terms of devices, we have a number of different devices across the district, and we try to focus what device meets the needs of the students at those levels. So for instance, at the younger grades, we have iPads, work great for them. The middle levels of students generally use Chromebooks, and then we have Windows devices at the upper grade levels. And each year we kind of take a look at that, make sure that we still feel that that's the right fit. We have a technology committee that meets regularly between administrators and teachers. We talk about what sort of things they're doing, looking at the budget, what kind of devices we can afford, and making our plans for future years. So we do try to keep on top of it, and we get input from folks like you too. So
I'm sorry.
we get input from you too, though. So
Yes.
we appreciate that. So ready to go on to technology? All right.
I'm sorry, just one other question. And Karen, Dr. Benton, sorry, I do appreciate the looking at all of the curricular resources, because Mick, the backpacks bother me, but I like the books. So I'm not bothered by the paper. I do appreciate, I know the licenses, we talked for a fair amount of time about that yesterday. And it is concerning about how expensive they get. So I appreciate the effort to look at utilization, to look at what's required, nice to have, and find some efficiencies. I would also add, and you might be thinking this and I didn't hear it. Also looking at the effectiveness of those resources and what kind of outcomes they're delivering, so that when we look at aligning that to our curriculum and the outcomes for our students, we know that they're effective as well. So,
And that's certainly a part of that process of when we look at our utilization, as well as our alignment to curricular delivery. Each year, we assess how we're using each of, the tools that we consider to be within our curriculum delivery, right? Which also includes our assessment platforms as well. And where we can, if a product is no longer meeting our needs or not producing outcomes for us, then that becomes a part of our discussion in terms of, is it something that we need versus is there a better product?
Excellent. So technology, continued maintenance of our one-to-one device program. We just talked about devices a little bit. I do have a grade of Windows laptops that are currently used by grade 7 students. And those devices are from 2015. Those are our oldest batch by far. Really need to be replaced. And then we have a grade worth of Chromebooks that are out of support by Google. Those were purchased in 2017, 2018, I believe. So we're going to try to replace those. Wireless coverage throughout the buildings. We actually bought 40 new access points for this year. We put them all at Baker. Did that a month or two ago. They've been working great. And so we want to replace the rest of them, another 350 in next year to get better coverage, capacity, throughput. The ones that are in place right now were purchased during the last, what's it called? Referendum, thank you, in 2014. So they are a bit old, a bit behind the times. Still work, but we really need the higher capacity now. And there's actually some money coming back too from the access points. They fall under what's called the E-rate program, which is a federal program, gives you some money back for certain equipment that's related to internet access and the internet access itself. So we get discounts on our internet service and on our access points and switches and wiring throughout the buildings, which is a nice program.
Jeff?
Yeah.
What percentage do we fall under for E-rate?
Our percentage, we get about a 40% discount, and that is based on your free and reduced lunch counts.
Right.
Yep.
And how are they getting down that far to the 40% level?
Yes, yes, they
Okay.
made some changes to the program a few years ago,
Okay,
and we are getting that full reimbursement now. Before that, yeah, you had to be in a really high percentage in order to get any
Yeah,
money from
they
it.
would
But
barely get below 80%.
yeah, everybody gets it now.
Okay.
New work order and asset management system. The work order system we have right now works, but it's really not meeting our needs anymore. And an asset management system is going to help us manage all of our IT assets. We do have one right now, but it also isn't meeting our needs anymore. So we're upgrading both of those. And the work order system would benefit both the IT department and the buildings and grounds department. More security cameras through principal requests for more coverage, and also to support the weapons detection system that we're integrating into our existing security practices. An IT security audit always helps to have another set of eyes looking at how me and my team are conducting security of all of our data and systems. That's pretty important. And then expansion of EDR and MFA. Endpoint detection and response is the first one. It's sort of the next generation of antivirus software. It protects you from ransomware and other malicious software. And multi-factor authentication is the other one. And that's like if you're logging into your Comcast account at home, usually it'll tell you that it needs to text you a number or make a phone call or something like that. Anyway, these are all to make sure that we have better security overall, and it helps move us to a better tier of cyber insurance coverage overall. So we hopefully have lower rates around cybersecurity. And all this stuff falls into educational supports and district security systems. Any questions?
I just have one about the work order and asset management system. When you say it's no longer meeting the needs, is there something specific or any? I'm just curious how
Yeah.
it isn't meeting the needs of what's changed, I guess.
So from my perspective on the work order system, it is, we got a fairly inexpensive system a few years ago, and it was part of a bundled package. It's called Our School Today. And it has a work order system and a calendaring system and facilities management. It does all of that pretty good. Some things better than others. The work order system never really felt all that functional for us. I mean, again, it does work, but it doesn't give us like the reporting that we really want to get out of it. The system seems to be a little slower than it used to be too. And we've worked with their support on that, but it just hasn't gotten a lot better. And then in the asset management system, and on the work order side too, we're looking for a new system where it will do email to work orders so that the staff who really don't like to have to log into our work order system and type out every single thing, they just send an email to work order MTPS and it goes right into our system. So on the end user perspective, it's going to work better. And then the asset management is, it's going to make it a lot easier for us to check equipment in and out at the end of the year and the start of the year. Our current one doesn't have any capacity for that. And it's also going to, the new system is going to have a mobile app so that my technicians can take a iPad or something out into the field and easily do their work orders right there, or checking in and out inventory right there. So it's got some nice features.
Just to kind of jump onto that one as well. When I kind of filled in as the quote unquote interim buildings and grounds supervisor for a little while, once I got into that work order system, my eyes were wide open to what it is lacking. Pretty much it's just a ticketing system, meaning you open a work order, somebody clicks it, is closed, and that's it. It can't pin, for example, this Dell device has had 2 screens replaced, 4 keyboards replaced, and a tracking pad replaced, and a motherboard 26 times. Maybe we got a problem here and we got to talk to Dell about it. It cannot do anything like that. There are comparable systems out there that can do that for comparable prices, and that's really what we're looking at. And on the asset tracking side, A larger piece of that is we are required to track all of our fixed assets in the districts. Our fixed asset threshold is anything more than $2,000 has to have an asset tag on it with a clear identifier number. And it's all part of our audit process. That auditors actually come out and they look at that, and it's depreciated over time. This will assist with that. What it also assists with is preventative maintenance plans. So every RTU, which is a rooftop unit, I apologize for the new board members using acronyms, always interrupt me on those. For a rooftop unit, you can track its preventative maintenance, meaning every quarter that should have a filter replaced on it. So if our technician goes out and they can go right up to the unit, scan it with, an iPhone, an iPad, whatever it might be, and see when the last filter was replaced without having to take it all apart, pull out the filter. So it's a lot better of a tracking system. So and we're looking to do that as close to neutral as we possibly can with the current system.
Since you're about to click, so before we move on,
Yeah.
first, that was going to be my follow-on question, which is, will the new work order and asset management system help us understand better our costs associated with maintaining this fleet? And it sounds like it will. So that's great. Jeff, going back to your last bullet point on there about the EDR and MFA, just to add to the acronym soup, are you looking at ZTNA yet? Because I've been seeing that
Zero trust.
Zero Trust Network Access.
Yes.
Yeah, has been like kind of supplanting MFA, because that still has some kind of, that could be.
That doesn't feel very SEL.
We've looked at a couple of products that would move us into that space, but we haven't really formally started to go that way yet. Trying to get onto MFA for school systems is a little challenging. Business world is definitely ahead of us on that in general, in terms of what the vendors can provide and how we respond, I guess.
On the positive side, MFA is probably cheaper because
Yes.
they're moving on past it. But just in terms of like protecting us against cyber attacks, that creates that kind of defense, like nothing gets in unless, right? And so just
That's a
kind
good
of
point.
curious about that.
Yeah.
All right.
And I do want to stress that I sit on a cybersecurity committee for the actual JIF. Cybersecurity insurance, if you're in that world, it is very hard to get now. It's becoming a lot like environmental insurance, which environmental insurance back in the day was very easy to get. And then all of a sudden this 4-letter word called mold came into play. And then all of a sudden every underwriter went sprinting away from the insurance market altogether. So it's getting a lot like that. Schools and governmental authorities are low hanging fruit in this. And really a lot of entities are 5 years behind, to Jeff's point, getting to that level where you need to be. So this is certainly an effort to do that.
James, is there, on the cybersecurity audits, is there any grant or any funding from the state? Have you seen anything?
Yeah, absolutely. We are always keeping our eyes open for those sorts of things. To my knowledge, the existence isn't out there at this point in time. I know a few years back, the JIF actually funded 2 audits for districts. They don't have the funding source at this point in time. And I had some conversations with them about that, but you'll see that their budget's facing a significant increase as well. So we're certainly keeping our eyes open for that.
I think that would certainly be a great lobbying effort. Yeah, the number of schools, public institutions, governments, hospitals, hospitals, some of them are for profit, so they can fend for themselves, but all these other entities, until we have like greater awareness of a bigger attack, that nobody's helping schools address this problem.
We were one of the districts that got that cybersecurity audit through the JIF at that time, and it was eye-opening. It was a great investment on their part in us, because we became a champion in the JIF for why districts need to do this. But even outside of the audit, one of the main things that came out of that audit was the need for the district to consider investment in one of our techs to really get trained in cybersecurity. And obviously we upgraded the position after the training, But the training in and of itself actually over time pays for itself because of the lower tier that you're able to get the cybersecurity insurance for. So having somebody in-house that really is monitoring and putting into place and able to conduct in many ways ongoing cybersecurity audits is something that I think districts have to start looking at and investing in. Jeff and I have talked about that.
Any other questions on the technology end? Thank you.
I just think it would be helpful, not tonight, but at some point to sort of have the price tag.
To understand the
these
costs
are-
associated.
Yeah, these are all obviously great initiatives.
Sure.
But certainly it would be helpful to understand.
Understood. And I think part of, there's a final slide kind of about next steps. Next steps is kind of closing the remaining deficit. And how are we going to do so?
Yeah.
Every single one of these items that are nice in this budget highlights right now may not end up in the final budget. So that's certainly that prioritization process.
I think it's next. So you heard me allude early in my comments about the work that we've been doing with the building principals as it relates to the various aspects of the budget. But one of the main components is as it relates to staffing, because as they put in their budgets, they're making requests for their needs. And so we have to take a very close look at that in terms of population, measure the need, prioritize things, and we do that in a collaborative way with them. And we show you this slide primarily because we want to send a very strong indication to you of the work that goes into reducing the budget along the way and that process. So initially, there were 11 full-time positions requested in this budget throughout the district and 11 part-time positions. Some of those were positions that were grant funded that we want to maintain. So they show up in that area. So after this collaboration of working with them, we were able to narrow that down to 5 full-time positions and 3 part-time positions. And that also includes absorbing some positions through attrition, which aren't showing on the slide, that help offset that cost. So there's at least 3 positions that we are absorbing through attrition. That's retirements that will help offset the cost associated with staffing. So in this, and the remaining requests are really supportive requests, particularly in those areas of the ESSER grant funded positions that we want to keep, that have been very strong in supporting educationally our students throughout the course of the year, plus some varied additional positions that are up there that are critical, like, for example, the position relative to, I'm sorry, I drew a blank. Thank you, dyslexia. So that's that process. So we prioritize the positions. We work with the administrative team, including the principals, to get to this place. And that's where it is at this moment. And we're still analyzing this, and you may see a further reduction as we continue to analyze before the board meeting in 2 weeks. Any questions on that regard? Very good. Thank you.
All right, so I believe this is our last kind of budget highlight slide here, which is particular to operations, which aligns primarily to the third goal, which is our analyzing our district systems. Capital outlay, we'll talk a little bit further about that in a future slide. As I stated earlier, capital outlay started over $11 million. It has since been cut back. The high level items that are inclusive in that capital outlay number right now include PA system upgrades and replacements at WAMS, UES, and Baker. These are aged and end of life equipment. A replacement of aging carpet throughout the district. One of the requests that we have seen year after year is the carpet in this room.
Good to me.
Certain door access control replacements and upgrades, and then various repairs and upgrades to existing sites and systems. That really is primarily safety related items, concrete work that's needed in certain areas, railings that have been damaged or are rusted that need to be replaced, items along those lines. Security software and system upgrades. That's just always analyzing our security software and analyzing system upgrades that can be made. We did have a discussion at Finance and Operations about a weapons detection system that Jeff mentioned in one of his slides. Our budgetary and personnel system replacement. So we are currently going through the process of reviewing our budgetary and personnel system. It gets the job done. However, there are great efficiencies that can be gained by replacing it. The number one efficiency that could be gained by replacing it is having a workflow system. So a system that somebody can log into, generate a purchase order, generate a reimbursement request, generate an expense voucher, and it automatically goes through the process with all digital signatures and approvals instead of being paper-based and having to move paper from building to building to central administration. We currently do not have that type of a system.
Can I ask, before we move off that, do we have the technology in place to do that? You know, to have that sort of electronic workflow system sort of integrate seamlessly, or like what?
It would come with a new software package for our budget and personnel package.
Okay.
Are you asking if we have it, that we could do it without the software purchase? Is that?
No, I'm just having seen these types of things at the place that I work.
Yep.
It always seems to involve like it impacts other things, right? Like that you then have to integrate in your systems to make sure that it.
Sure. So the package that we are looking at right now is a prominent school vendor package. It's actually a vendor that we already have in place for our student information system. The integration across systems, Jeff is a wizard, so thank you, Jeff, for that. He makes a lot of systems talk to one another every single night, every single day, and cross-load data. We would certainly still need that. And we have already vetted this package that it can do that.
Okay.
And that it does play nice with our other systems.
And that would presumably free up whoever's handling that now will be that'll free that person or people up to do other things.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I have a question just to piggyback off of Mark's question. For the security and software system upgrades, would something like Jeff was talking about, techs going out in the field and being able to access their work orders, like would that need a physical iPad edition, like a hardware upgrade?
I think for the most part, internal to the district, we have enough resources to be able to put in place and wrap around that already. You know, for certain, our HVAC mechanics, we're not going to send them up there with a brand new iPad climbing on top of the roof. We don't want that. We don't want it in their hand at that point in time. So I think we already have the resources in play to be able to do that. So I don't think the asset management system or the ticketing system would incur an additional cost to get that off the ground.
Are there opportunities, because we do some things with Delanco, like shared services agreement?
Absolutely.
Are there opportunities to do, sort of split the system with them or with other?
We really have to have our standalone system, and Jeff can speak more to this because of how our database is managed versus their database, and they may not even actually allow you to do that in terms of their licensing, their agreements. However, it's not to say that there isn't an opportunity there to grow that shared services with Delanco, because we actually have been having discussions about that. Namely, our person who oversees our student information system has been providing a lot of support to Delanco, and they've had some turnover of staff. So we identified that as a potential area to have a conversation with them, and have already done so to say, if you need those levels of services, we're more than happy to have a discussion about that, but that's going to be above and beyond the shared services agreement.
Okay.
Can you go back one more? Thank you. The LED project and lease purchase. So for the last now 5 years, that would be the 6th year, we always try to package an LED project inside of our lease purchase. The reason why we do that is the cost of the lease, the interest rate associated with the lease. The LED project helps pay for the lease, the interest rate associated with it. So really, we're going out for a lease purchase. We've hit as low as 0.8 What we have in the budget for next year is 4.25% because interest rates are up right now. But the savings that you get back from the LED project help pay for that lease. So we try and always package an LED project inside of that lease. Obviously, that will expire at some point. We have one building left to do, and that would be Roberts. Transportation highlights. So transportation is always a significant challenge. We're aware, obviously, the market associated with transportation right now. Primarily, that first bullet point, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a future slide. The state comes out every year with what's called their CPI rate. That CPI rate, by law, transportation contracts we're required to go to our transportation contractors and say, look, this is the CPI rate. Are you interested in renewing your contract or not based off of that rate? And they have to make a financial decision for themselves if they can renew based off of that rate or not. Over the last few years, it's been less than 2%. Contractors have sprinted far away from that number and said, look, we can't keep doing these routes at that cost. When we put 11 of our 13 routes out the bid last year, they came back with an average increased cost of anywhere from 15 all the way, I think, up to 22%. So substantial increases in transportation. The CPI, from what we're being told from the state right now, the transportation CPI isn't final just yet, but they're telling us to expect 5.89%. 5.89% is a substantial sum of money when we're looking at a 2% levy increase to make up the difference. However, the 5.89%, our hope right now is that most of our contractors will renew at that rate. We've also taken the time to review our driver salaries to make sure we're competitive in that area. We do have an allotment in for additional cameras to outfit buses that currently do not have cameras, to load cameras onto those buses. We are mindful with doing that. By state law, these buses have to be taken off the road after 12 years in certain circumstances, 15 years in others. If they're coming up on that date, we're not going to put a camera in it. It's 1 year out. That's just not smart. So we are mindful of that when we go through that process. And facilities maintenance, we do have one truck replacement in a lease purchase right now. Our fleet is rather aged. So it is a good idea to be replacing those timely. This truck that would be replaced is an early 2000 stake body truck that's probably been welded together about 7 times now. Next slide. So this is the revenues portion of the budget when we initially input all of the budget. So this slide right here is based off of a January date and time frame of when we initially put in the budget. So one of the things that you'll see here is a $1.6 million increase ultimately, or 2.04%. Really, that's driven by 1.3% or $1,375,000 increase on our tax levy, 2%. Extraordinary aid, we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive in our tax levy as well as extraordinary aid to have a little bit more of a discussion about extraordinary aid. There's potential that we can increase this number, this $800,000 number. But we'll talk about that in a future slide in just a minute. Our tuition, $21,000 decrease. That really is just, we take a look every year at what tuition students were receiving, what tuition students were receiving from staff members, our private tuition students, and we have some graduating. So this is representative of that.
Is that primarily full day kindergarten or?
That's everything. That's full day K, that's preschool, that is staff tuition. So staff paying to bring their student here, as well as that's private paid tuition.
I think before we estimated the full day K was like around 800.
Yes.
Okay, so the remainder of that is those other buckets.
Correct. Interest rates are up currently. So that's why we're expecting a higher interest rate there. Pay to participate in parking fees. This was something implemented, I believe, in the 2021 school year that we started it. That $150,000 number has pretty much ran true to that number. So that's a good budget number there. Our rentals, this is just analyzing the actual usage of our rentals there. Miscellaneous, there's a large decrease here. We will talk about that in a little bit. The main driver of that decrease is in the prior year, we took in what's called a SHIF and JIF dividend. So the good thing about being in the SHIF and being in the JIF is it's a conglomerate of school districts that are all in it for the same reason, saying, let's pull our resources together and get the best possible rates. When you do that at the end of the year, any excesses that are left over in those JIFs are ultimately returned to school districts as dividends. So those were represented in revenue last year. And there are dividends that are expected in the future year that we could certainly recognize into the budget. We're going through that process right now to see if we would ultimately recommend that forward to the board.
Ouch,
And
that's tough.
yeah. And the next item is budgeted fund balance. So I'm going to go a little bit more into a deeper dive on what budgeted fund balance is, because for our new board members, it's a very confusing item, but I can hopefully guide the ship on that. But ultimately, we have a $463,000 increase there. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is our initial budget on the appropriation side. So as Mr. Bollendorf mentioned with our staffing initially, this was all of those positions, those 11 FTE full-time, and I believe it was 11 part-time as well. Those were all included in that number to represent that 5.45% increase. Going down the next line is our benefit section, the bulk of which the pension liability is an estimate that we are given the calculation from the state based off of the filings that we've made from previous quarters for pension. So that number is really a fixed number. Health benefits, we'll talk a little bit more about on a future slide. We received a 6.4% increase on our health benefit renewal. We did expect a large increase in our health benefits. Coming out of COVID, it's well documented that more people are getting procedures done now. More people are going back to the doctors. Those are the types of things that are driving costs. At finance and operations, we also took a look at our actual Morristown claim experience as well to dig a little bit deeper into that and better understand it. So overall, workers' comp is the next item, and then our retirement payout. One of the items that is in our contract is a February 1st date to notify us of an employee's intent to retire. That notification requirement allows us to better budget for these items. So we have had quite a bit of retirements. So that's what's driving that number there, that $242,000 increase. The good thing about it, we know what that number is. Prior to having that provision, you're blindly budgeting and you're just kind of doing the finger in the air test. On the other side, so these are a lot. I'll refer to these as kind of the fixed costs of the district. That's the roughly 82 to 85% that we typically see with the salary and benefits. These are our departmental and our school-based budgets, as well as our capital outlay. So ultimately, after everything was in, we were 14.25 million over budget. That's inclusive of a 2% levy increase. Now, the main driver of that number is capital outlay. Capital outlay was in for 11,171,000.
What about the PD and travel? That's up 60%.
Yep. That has since been cut down. You'll see that on a later slide with where the budget's at currently. This is really, at the end of the day, when principals input their budget and departments input their budget. This is pie in the sky. This is everything we want. So that number has come down drastically. The specifics of those numbers, I can definitely drive down to that for the board and get a little bit more detail. Can you go to the next slide, please? So let's talk a little bit more about the revenues. So our revenue, the largest revenue source that we have is our local tax levy. Here in Morristown, our revenue source is primarily driven by our local tax levy, as opposed to state aid. We've been talking about S2 and what S2 does to our state aid, which it's a good thing for a district like Morristown, but a 2% levy increase is roughly $1,375,000. Our state aid, we always initially budget flat, but we knew that we were on the good side of S2. We knew that we were going to get additional funding. But as a budgetary good practice, we budget flat, and then whatever comes in helps us balance the budget ultimately. We saw a $525,000 increase roughly on state aid. There's I believe the next slide, we'll take a look a little bit more at where our state aid's at in terms of, are we fully funded by the formula or not yet? Budgeted fund balance. So what is budgeted fund balance? It's composed of the prior year, 21-22. So our 21-22 audit. At the end of the day, when we get that audit, at the bottom of that audit, there's a number that says fund balance, says excess surplus, subsequent year. That number has to go into this budgeted fund balance number. There's certain allowable adjustments to that number. The number one allowable adjustment is free general fund excess balances that are projected as of the end of this school year. So when I go in to our actual budget software, I have to enter the current year's budget as of February 1st. So February 1st, 2023. Then we enter the future year budget. That the numbers that go into that current year budget at February 1st, that number helps drive that free general fund excess balance number. So ultimately, this is a number that when you get access to the budget software, which you don't have access to it initially, when they open it up, you can start to go in there and get access to that number. Ultimately, we're looking at a $463,000 increase on our budgeted fund balance. Finance and operations met yesterday. Part of what we did yesterday, the first thing that we did was we had our audit exit conference, which is rather late compared to what it normally is, but the state has been delayed on getting actuarial reports out for GASB 75, which I won't bore you with that. But that is what drives this number. The excess surplus number in that audit, the theory behind it is this is money that you did not spend in this year. It's got to go in as a revenue source into a future year budget to offset taxes. That's the theory behind it, and that's statutorily required. Other revenue sources, primarily made up of our tuition, which is from individuals, preschool, extended kindergarten, and other districts. Facility rentals, extraordinary aid, pay to participate parking, shared services, which is our revenue generator. We're ultimately projecting a $195,000 decrease there. Keep in mind, the sole driving factor of that is last year we had a shift in JIF dividend. Right now, I don't have that recognized, but part of the process to close the $2.9 million will certainly be a recommendation to absorb some of that. Can you go to the next slide? So this is a 5-year look at our tax levy. For our newer board members, our tax levy is composed of 2 different levies. Number 1, your general fund levy. Number 2, your debt service levy. Your general fund levy, it's everything we do to educate a student. It's your salaries, it's your benefits, it's the lights on, it's the carpet that you want to replace if we want to replace it. It's everything we do to operate our district and educate our students. Our debt service levy, the only way you get that debt service as a district is if you put out a referendum and the voters approve you to ultimately do a referendum and bond debt. We do not have sole authority to do that. So of our levy, We're budgeting 70,148,000 in general and 4,465,000 in debt service. The debt service fund is a neutral fund. So what comes in from the taxpayers goes right out to pay principal and interest. Looking at the last 5 years, you can see on our general levy, we had a 2% increase, we had a 2.39, we had a 2.29, 2.29, and the 23-24 proposed is a 2%. Looking at our debt service has continually went down. That is number one, in accordance with our payment schedule, because that's how you structure debt when you go out and get bonded. But that's number two, we did a refinance in 2021 for a lower interest rate when interest rates were down, which helped fuel a larger decrease there. That minus 2.28 is solely because of that. If you look at our ratables, the ratables are the taxable properties in the township of Morristown. So in essence, for the 23-24 school year, you have a 2% increase on your general levy, you have a 1.02% decrease on your debt service fund levy, and you have a net impact to the taxpayer of a 1.81% as the budget stands currently. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is the slide that I've done for a couple years now since S2 has been out. Our prior board members, I apologize if you've heard this, but what we have here is our green line is our uncapped aid. Our blue line is our state aid. That's the actual amount that the state said, this is your award. The green line is if we're actually following the state funding formula, that's the amount of money we would have received. In 2019, we should have received $1 million more than what we actually received. That is what S2 is intended to do. It's intended to take districts that are overfunded and reallocate those funds to districts that are underfunded. We are underfunded. So ultimately, we want to see that blue line touch the green line, and we want to see the yellow line get to zero. We're getting pretty close to that. We got another $166,000 to go. Can you go to the next slide? Extraordinary aid. So first, let me start with what is extraordinary aid. Extraordinary aid is a state grant opportunity that we participate in every year. You have to do an individual application for every student that would qualify. The student qualifies if they receive what's called intensive services. There's certain in the grant application, there's certain services that qualify for that. And every student is an actual application that we do that for. So these are special education services. The state, when the state originally put together extraordinary aid, they put it together with the intent to fully fund districts for costs over a certain threshold, depending on what category you're in. They were quickly unable to meet their end of the bargain there because they did not have enough in the state budget to fully fund districts accordingly. In the past, you can see this line right here, actual percentage awarded of eligible expenses, 62, 90, 83. Before that 62.54%, we were typically seeing somewhere around 54% that the state was funding extraordinary aid. So state statute said, we're going to pay you dollar for dollar over a certain threshold. And then the state budget said, we don't have enough. Here's 50 cents for every dollar though. The good thing over the last few years, this is the New Jersey state budget for extraordinary aid. 275, 400, 420, 420. So the state's current budget came out with a message that they're maintaining the prior year's level of funding for extraordinary aid, which is good because you can see that that's what increased this percentage here, 90 and 83.89. One thing to understand about extraordinary aid. Extraordinary aid, and it's the reason why this 22-23 column is empty. So the state just released their budget, 420 million in extraordinary aid. that $420 million will reimburse districts for expenditures that are currently happening in the current year. And we won't get that money until August or September of 2023. It's a reimbursement basis. You got to spend the money before you get the money. Another thing to keep in mind with it, here's our total cost. So for our actual extraordinary aid, we put out $6.5 million and spent $6.5 million. We had 2.8 that was eligible. We actually got 2.4 roughly back, 2.392. So you don't get the full amount back. It is to assist with amounts over what the state has deemed excess cost over and above. So why is this all meaningful? Ultimately, these are the amounts of revenue that we budgeted. We budgeted 600,000, 600,000. In 21-22, I increased that to 750,000. But you can see what we're receiving is significantly higher. There's room to adjust that upward now that we know that the state is maintaining that budget. I've had conversations with NJ ASBO, my professional organization. I've had conversations with the county. This has been very silent as to, is the state going to fully fund it? And is the state going to fund any additional allotments into this? Seeing that it's flat, that's good news. I've told multiple board members in the past, I've had concerns that maybe some of the federal money was helping offset some of this. But seeing $420 million in there, I think there's certainly potential to increase this number here for the following year. Can you go to the next slide? This here is our other sources of revenue. So you can see our tuition, it's roughly the same over the last 3 years, 1.9 million. Facility rentals, same, no drastic changes there. Other governments, roughly the same. That's where your extraordinary aid would rest though. So that number could certainly be going up in the future here to close the gap. And then our other sources of revenue, you see a decline there. That's the GIF and shift dividend. Next slide. Onto the appropriation side of the house. This is what we spend our money on. So salaries, we're going, the 23-24 school year will be year 2 of 3 with our MEA contract, and our MA contract expires June 30th of this year. The negotiations committee has started up discussions with MA about negotiating a successor agreement. Our insurance, we originally projected a 5% increase. We now know our health insurance is projected for a 6.4% increase. Finance and operations yesterday met and reviewed our experience data of what's driving that increase. And our general insurance, 7.5% increase. That 7.5% increase, our GIF is expected to have a 9.5% increase of their overall budget. So we are certainly on the lower end of increases for the GIF. Again, we've reviewed the experience related to that as well to take a look at what's driving that as well. Student accident, 1% confirmed increase. So good news there. We have our instructional supplies and materials that are in the budget. That's in those other areas that was in the original initial proposed budget, our department budgets, and our capital outlay. Can you go to the next slide? So on the operations side, so we do have an increase anticipated for fuel and contracted transportation services. So again, we always are concerned about heading into this time of year. Are our contractors going to renew or not? We try and get that answer from them before we finalize the budget, but sometimes we don't have that answer. So we got to make our best projections on that. Our bus driver rates were reviewed and compared to surrounding districts. Obviously, minimum wage impact. We're in that final year of a roughly $1 increase. This is the first year where we saw CPI increase on top of that $1 increase. So instead of $14 an hour, went to $14.13. So minimum wage will impact us again for its final year. Winter track. So we've had conversations about winter track. Winter track is currently included in the preliminary budget. And that is represented by about $40,000. And our budgetary CPI from the state. I know these two numbers do not align. That's with intent. For the budget purposes, we've been told by the state to expect 5.89% on CPI. This 8% in effect as of February 15th, 2023. Local public contracts law. That's what we have to follow when we procure things. We have to follow local public contracts law. That doesn't mean that every single time I want to buy something, I got to go out and say an 8% increase. What that means is if you're renewing a contract from year 1 to year 2, and you're in this window of February 15th, 8% is your marker. It's got to be 8%. It can be less, negotiate it with the person who negotiated with the business, but you can expect how those conversations would go. So 8% is the number currently. So it's a good thing that they're expecting CPI to cool down a little bit, but hopefully that falls true. Next slide, please. I apologize for how small this is. This is just a view of how we actually spend our money. So we just had our 21-22 audit. We just had our exit conference associated with it. The reason why I mentioned that, these are audited expenditures, meaning testing was performed on every single one of these expenditures. Not every single one, but a sample size of every single one. Salaries represent 63% of our overall budget. Benefits are 20%. So we expended 83% of our overall budget on salary and benefits last year. Out of district tuition, 3%, transportation, 4%. Supplies are 1% of the budget, energy, 1% of the budget. Our maintenance, 7% of the budget. And our other expenditures are less than 1% of the overall expenditures. I include this slide in here just to give you guys an idea as to the quote unquote buckets of funding sources. Can you go to the next slide? So these are adjustments that we've made to date to the budget to get down from ultimately that $14 million overreach. So staffing, we've evaluated new position requests and adjusted, removed them from the budget. We've evaluated existing staffing adjustments, retirements, leaves of absences. If a staff member has been on a leave of absence for a certain amount of time, they do not move on the guide next year. So those are things that we go through the process and we monitor that all along the way. And again, this is adjusted over time. So every day it's changing. Minimum wage adjustments. So we've decreased the budget in terms of staffing by $751,000 approximately. Benefits, $53,000. That number doesn't seem to really jive with staffing overall. Our estimate for staffing in terms of benefits when a new staff member is requested, if it's a full-time employee, we tell people $27,500 to expect as their benefit allocation. That $53,000 is net of, we budgeted a 5% increase. It came in at a 6.4% increase, but we've had additional staffing cuts to that $750,000. So that's net. Department and building budgets have been cut and reduced by $325,000. Capital outlay has been reduced by $9.7 million. The reductions there primarily consist of, number one, a parking lot, repaving a parking lot and expanding a parking lot. You can assume where that parking lot is. It was in a prior referendum and it is rather aged. It's behind the high school and part of the high school parking lot. That would cost us roughly $2.4 million to do.
Does that include the Bridgeboro widening, right? Because once we touch the parking lot.
It doesn't. Good
Okay.
point. It does not.
Okay. So it's 2.4
Just for the parking lot.
just for the lot and then like another 3-ish.
When it was in the last referendum, I believe it was in for roughly $1.5 million, but I think in today's market, that's probably a fair assessment.
Okay.
I also think that's something we need to look into.
For sure.
The notion of the expansion of the road falling on a district that's new. how that happened, where it happens, or how it's been put into writing that it will happen. But it's probably worth investigating is how we might be able to undo it. I'm hearing it happen with some freeholders some time ago. Maybe getting that out so that when you plan in the future, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, I agree. I take it Bridgeboro is a county road, so that's why we're dealing with.
Correct.
Commissioners.
Correct.
Where's our lobbyist?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was mainly associated with the walkway.
Which the Stanwyck Glen developer for phase 2, they never made them do anything there.
The other driving factors in that capital outlay, the tennis courts, that's been a reoccurring item. That's to the tune of 1.4 million roughly to fully mill those and replace those. And an additional turf field was put in. That would be roughly 850,000. There are also other items that are included in that. The MAC floor is getting close to end of life. The Eisenberg floor is end of life, meaning that you cannot sand that floor any more times and refinish it. It is what I believe is the original floor to the gym. So that will have to be replaced soon. Typically, in terms of the grand scheme, you don't want to pay for these out of your budget, out of your capital outlay, out of your capital reserve. If they are in a school building and attached to the educational component, you want to go through a referendum process. The reason why, you're going to pay 100% through your budget if you do it. If you go through a referendum process, you're going to get state aid back on that referendum, usually to the tune of 60%, 40% split. Lease purchase has been evaluated by our department heads for further reductions. Roughly $422,000 has been reduced out. Now, keep in mind, it's a 5-year lease purchase, so that's not dollar for dollar in terms of budget reductions. The actual reduction to next year's budget is $84,688.
Can you just give us like a sense as to what's included generally in the lease purchase?
Absolutely. I'll ask for our other cabinet members to jump in here, but I'll give you the areas that I oversee. Facilities is the LED project, about 75,000. And the replacement of a vehicle, which is also about 75,000.
1 year again, spread out over 5.
Yeah, spread out over 5. Yep. And then our transportation would be a 54 passenger bus. That's a replacement of a bus that's expiring, as well as a Sprinter van type of vehicle that would have a wheelchair lift that we could use for some of our out of district special education runs. That would be a little bit more efficient than using a 18 passenger bus, or a 24 passenger bus.
Yep.
Anyone want to go next? Oh. Yeah.
So adjustments, everyone but the last one are subtractions and the last one is an addition? Is that?
Yes, so good question. And it's a little bit confusing there. So when I say adjustments made to date, I mean adjustments to ultimately close that deficit. So it could be increases of revenue. That's what that additional state aid is. Everything else is a budgetary reduction in our planned expenditures.
Yep. Okay. And so I guess with the exception of 6 through 8, those textbooks and the digital licensing stuff, we're already locked into that. Locked in, like we've already, I assume, budgeted that like last year, right? For textbooks for grades K to,
Yeah.
Okay. right, okay. So it's not, I'm just saying, it's not like a unanticipated or new expense. It's, okay.
Is it correct? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff, and then I'll.
For the tech lease items, I put quite a few different things in there that range in dollar values. I'll hit the higher dollar amount ones. We have replacement of the specialized desktop computers in the video production lab here at WAMS, and the one of the engineering CAD labs at the high school. Those machines are 5+ years old. Another big ticket item, the student one-to-one laptops replacement that I talked about. One grade worth of Chromebooks is about $95,000, and one grade worth of Windows devices about $267,000. Security and security cameras, CCTV cameras, have 50 cameras in the budget, mostly exterior cameras, which are a little more expensive, $65,000 for that in total. Smart boards at the high school science rooms per principal request, $56,000. The wireless access points that I talked about. And after the E-rate costs for those, that would be about $110,000. And then, yeah, all these things spread out over 5 years because these are on the lease, yes. And the last big thing, 2 replacement servers, $32,000 total. Those are the big ones.
Okay.
So is my understanding correct that we have basically a lease line of credit? Is that provided by one of the vendors that we're buying equipment from? Is it an independent, like a third party? Is it a bank?
Good question. So the way we handle that, again, we have to follow local public contracts law. So there's a specific way to procure that. So every year, once we authorize our budget and say, you know what, we have $1.5 million, $2 million in a lease purchase. I work with our financial advisor. We put together bid specs, we put it out. The bidders are usually always banks. For example, last year Truist won the bid. Prior years it was TD Bank. So it's a competitive process with usually multiple banks bidding on it.
Is that process necessary if, say, one of our vendors provides the lease?
I would defer to John on that. My initial thought process would be yes, because it has to be some sort of competitive process. So I don't believe that a vendor would be able to kind of envelope themselves into that I'm providing $1 million worth of equipment and I agree to give it to you over a 5-year span. So there would have to be a formality to that for sure.
Okay. And then how often are we redoing that? Is it a 5-year lease? So is it a floating rate? Is it a set rate?
Set, it's fixed rate. So
Fixed.
last year, we actually opened, and I'm almost confident that it was last year and it wasn't the year prior. We opened and it was the 0.8%. It will remain fixed at that. It will not be adjusted for the market today.
Okay, so that's good. And then is there ever any value left in any of the equipment? And can we utilize any, any value there
Yeah.
to offset costs at the end of the life?
Sure.
Now, I know it sounds like sometimes, I assume there's a dollar out lease, right? That, basically after we
Capital
paid
lease.
for it for 5, we
Yep.
pay for it for 5 years, it's ours.
Correct.
That's why we have laptops that are 7 years old, 8 years old, right? Anything like, are we looking at like kind of the life cycles to maximize getting any value back and say trading in the lower the acquisition costs?
Yeah, we have had conversations about that. I know Jeff has talked about it in the past related to technology. There's been conversations with that in the past. Another area that it could be a big factor is transportation. Those buses, they're not cheap. A 54 passenger bus used to be around 110. Now it's about 140, 150,000. Some districts, what they do is to maintain a younger fleet. After you have to wait until the 5 years because the lease actually puts a lien on the vehicle. So there's certain rules with what you can do within that 5-year range. But afterwards, say you're on year 6 and you don't want to get this thing out to year 14 where it's virtually worth $0 because you can't have it on the road, even if it's in good shape by state law. Districts have sold them, recouped some money in year 6, year 7, and kind of kept their fleet at a younger age. We've taken some looks at that. Specifically, I believe when our prior transportation supervisor was here, he took a little bit of a deeper dive into it. We had so many buses coming up on expiration that we just needed to get those replaced before we could kind of dig deeper into that. But we're certainly having those discussions.
Yeah, that would be the two areas I would say to look at. One, getting in those relationships where you can lower your lease costs over time.
Sure.
And the other is whether it's talking to Camegno or somebody else, finding, where vendors sometimes, for buying from them, they'll give you very low rates or 0% and allow you to add other things into it.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
That might be
Absolutely.
some ways to save some money there.
And then the additional state aid, we've spoken about that. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is our current status of our revenue. So we still have the 2% levy increase in there. The next line, you can see the state aid. The state aid has since been adjusted to include our $525,000 increase. Extraordinary aid. So I did increase our extraordinary aid budget to 800,000. So that's a $50,000 increase. And then our other sources have remained the same as what they were in the initial budget. That's one area that we're currently reviewing, whether or not we would recommend taking that GIF and shift dividend to help offset that decrease there. The GIF and shift money is certainly there for that exact reason, that when we're in a year where we have a abnormal increase and a significant increase, it's certainly there to do exactly that, to offset that increase and help us. Our revenue generation initiatives, we have that budgeted at flat. SEMI, that is a federal program. That number is dictated to us from the state, that we have to put that number in and we have to hit that revenue mark. And then our budgeted fund balance, no change there. Can you go to the next slide? On the appropriation side, you'll recall this number was over 5% initially. So some of the reductions there can certainly be seen. Our benefits, those are relatively consistent with the exception of the decrease in the actual health benefit side. But now we actually know our workers' comp increase, so that's reflected in there. And then our other, you can see that these numbers have come down quite a bit compared to the original budget. Professional services have come down. What's in the professional fees, that's our solicitor, that's our architect, that's our auditor, those entities. In terms of capital outlay as of right now sits at 1.4 million. We won't be able to reduce that number to 0. The reason being, included in that number is $122,000 SDA assessment that we're required to pay back to the state of New Jersey for prior debt. So that number won't go to exactly 0. But part of what we're doing right now is identifying the remaining projects and prioritizing those. Can they wait another year? Can they wait for a future referendum? Can they be funded through other funding sources? Capital reserve, maintenance reserve. We've made 2 deposits to those funds after last audit. Our capital reserve is now up to 1.7 million. Our maintenance reserves at 500,000. Those funding sources can certainly help to go against that. That's the convenient thing. That's a nice thing to have with those funding sources. Keep in mind, as you start to spend those, you got to replace some of those dollars. You can't have a district this size. When I originally started here, we had about $100,000 in capital reserve. If a boiler goes, an RTU goes, you're not going to be able to replace that. Can you go to the next slide? Tax impact.
James,
Yes.
can you remind, what is the number that you've told FNO that we should reach for the reserves?
The minimum.
There's a minimum that you'd like to stay at.
For the reserves, so
For-
right now we
for a
have
district our
1.7 roughly in capital reserve. We have 500,000 in maintenance reserve. The conversation that we had with FNO and at FNO was a district this size. It's not uncommon to see $3 to $4 million in capital reserve. Reason being, as projects come up, you want to be able to do them. You don't want to have to wait every 20 years for a referendum to have the capability to do a project. Second reason, emergencies happen. When you need a funding source to be able to replace something quickly, that's your funding source. So, and again, an RTU, an HVAC issue, you have that funding source right then and there. You don't have to go and ask voter approval to ultimately do that project.
And good job building it up. It was down to 107,000 like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Which, yeah,
I think we got down to 2,000 after we had to do the water.
The-
This is a perfect
the
example.
fire line, right?
We had to
Like
do the water main for the high school. That water main cost $80,000 to retunnel that into the high school. You have to be able to do that. And that was really forced upon us by other entities as well, because they weren't happy with the water pressure with our fire system. 22-23. This is our current year school levy. This is the budget as it exists today. Ultimately, there's your 1.81% increase. When you look at it, this number, and just to give you a little bit of background too, we have a good working relationship with our township CFO. Our township CFO is also our treasurer. He helps me out and lets me know what number is he anticipating in his budget process for ratables. So that's where that number comes from. Also, the average assessed value, that's the average assessed home as of now in the township of Morristown. So looking at our current levy, 82.23, and our future levy would be 83.35 for a $111 increase. If you look at that on a monthly basis, you're looking 685 to 694 or $9.27. One note down here, the ratables are estimated. The township has to go through an appeal process. So that ratable number can typically come down, but the township also factors that in when they give us that ratable number. Can you go to the next slide? Debt service. So a little bit of background on our debt service. This is our bonded debt that we have to repay. This is the principal and interest associated with those debt issuances and what did we do with that money. So our 2003 issuance was refinanced in 2012 and refinanced in 2021. So board members that were here in 2021, you'll recall the process that we undertook to ultimately refinance that debt to lower the rate associated with it and lower the amount that we have to pay back. That issuance was originally used for renovations at the high school, Whams, Baker, Roberts, South Valley, and to acquire Bridgeboro Fields for athletic purposes. You can see how much was originally issued, how much is outstanding as of the end of this school year. That's how much we have left to pay in principal. When do we pay that off? January 15th, 2029. 1999 issuance, refinanced 05, refinanced in 2015. That was used to build UES and do various renovations at the high school and middle school. You can see how much was issued, how much is outstanding. Final payment, January 1st, 2029. So in the 28-29 school year, we got 2 issuances that would be coming off of our books. 2014 issuance, originally used for upgrades, Roberts, South Valley, Baker, UES, Williams, and high school. You can see how much was issued. That one goes out to July 15th, 2036. In terms of future planning, future potential expansion, it's important to keep these dates in mind. Typically, Cherry Hill is a district that just approved a large referendum, $380 million. They did not have any debt service. The taxpayers are going to see and feel that large increase. Typically, when debt is expiring, you want to be going back out for debt. The reason being, you bond debt for 20, 25, 30 years. Well, think about what you did with that debt. You put down a parking lot. You put down HVAC units in. You did various upgrades to systems in the school. So when that debt's expiring, those systems are theoretically 20 years old, 25, 30 years old. They're end of life. So you got to be mindful of where our outstanding debt is. Can you go to the next slide? This is an overview of the refinancing that we do. Whenever there is an opportunity to refinance existing debt, there are limits on what you can refinance, and that's really limited by when you go out for the debt, how soon you can then refinance. Whenever we can refinance and whenever the market says it's best to do so, and we levy our financial advisors for information related to that, we do so. So in 2021, that was an ample time, perfect time to do some refinancing. And this ultimately is the yield of that. The blue line here is what we would have paid, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. The orange line is ultimately after the refinancing for the reduction. Next slide, please.
Nice work.
So items to consider to close the remaining deficit. Department building level budgets. So we're still going through the process of looking at department budgets, building level budgets for further reductions. Personnel. Further prioritization of the staffing request. Staffing adjustments, reductions of current staffing levels to cover deficit through efficiency, through attrition, whatever it might be. Capital outlay, prioritize and fund through reserve accounts. So this is the conversation that we had on a prior slide. That last $1.4 million, part of the process that I'm going through right now is prioritizing those projects. What can wait? What is immediate for safety, security needs? And how can we pay for it? That's not included in the budget. Revenue projections, GIF and shift dividends, extraordinary aid. Extraordinary aid, again, we talked about that slide. We can't spend money that we've already spent. You can't spend it twice, but we can adjust our revenue to be more aligned to what we receive and ultimately what the state budgeted. Fund balance currently being reviewed to see if there's additional allotments in fund balance that we could potentially appropriate by lessening potential transfers to capital reserve, maintenance reserve, and those funding sources. These are items that we've talked about in the past: transportation adjustments, co-curricular and athletic activity adjustments. Our goal is to come out of this meeting and ultimately out of this week through work with our central administrative team, our building administrative teams, to balance the budget through these sources here and ultimately be able to introduce a balanced budget to the board through those first 3 or 5 sources there. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you, as always, for your continued support. If you have any questions, happy to field.
That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Not only great, but obviously, a ton of work and great explanation. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I've been witnessing school budgets for a long time. I have to tell you, James, that was without question the most educational delivery and explanation of all the various things that we work with in a budget that I've ever seen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I am happy to do that. I was actually looking at my calendar today. Yolanda's going to be sending an email to the full board of what those hours look like. I am more than happy to meet one-on-one with you guys and have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation wherever's needed.
James, you did it differently this year with the department, with the school-based budgets.
Yes.
Are you happy with how that went? Are you?
Yes, I think the main thing that drives out of that is, number one, the funds move from building to building with the students based off of projections. That's a good thing. So you're not keeping, if the high school has declining enrollment, you're not keeping allotments at the high school when Baker has increasing enrollments. I'm just using rough examples. So that's a good thing of it. The other good thing is it helps be able to button up those budgets and kind of put them on the shelf and lead into the more significant conversations. So it definitely is a good thing. Any other questions?
Great job.
Great
All right.
job. Great
Thank
job.
you. I
It's
appreciate it.
extremely complex. But so what do you need from us tonight?
There's nothing official that you need to do tonight. It's a budget workshop, and there's nothing that I don't believe that you need to take action on. There's work that still needs to be done. And obviously we can update you as we're moving through that process in advance of delivery of the proposed budget on the 21st. But we still have work to do to get to where we need to get to. I have every confidence in this guy here that we'll get to where we need to be. You asked a lot of really great questions tonight about specificities in the budgets. Obviously, if that leads to questions that are more specific and wonderments as to whether or not we want to do this, that, or the other, then as James said, I think it's a good idea for you to reach out or even carry those into questions at committee, and we'll get those answers to those questions for you. But I feel confident that we'll get things where they need to be.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about the budget? All right, so we'll make a motion to open public comment.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Was that it?
Seeing no public commenters, I'll move to close.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Before we do the good of the order, there are items for an executive session related to legal matters and personnel matters. And so I'd like to make a motion to go into executive.
So moved.
All in favor? And we can go into, there will be no action taken after executive, so. But we will be.
Central admin, you want them to take off?
Yes, yeah, central admin can take off. There's really nothing.
Thank you, everybody. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, we're going to come out and say goodnight, so I think we're good.
Take a left and it's on my right.
Oh, I thought we were just going to the.
We are.
Yeah, we're going to the training.
We're going in the training.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
She wants to break too. I think you're gonna break too.
Okay.
The rate.
Thank you.
Yeah.